Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Robert Barr, and I'm joined by
Rabbi Rachel Sabbath Beit Halachmi.
Delighted you're here. Delighted you're here to celebrate this Shabbat with us. We're going to begin our service with a reading.
Put away the pencil and paper. Put away the notebook and keys. Set aside the shovel and hammer. Rest. For this interval, no buying, no selling, no working, no laboring, no straining, not living in the past, not planning for the future.
This is a time for celebration, for joy, for mirth. We are here alive to rejoice in another Sabbath, another opportunity to be together, grateful for our family and friends. With no distractions, we touch and are touched, the great gift of the Sabbath. So it's wonderful to have you here joining us at this Shabbat service. Some of you are watching live, and you'll be probably chatting with one another. Others of you watch this in our archives, because for everybody, 6 o'clock on a Friday is not the most convenient time, is it?
No, certainly not an Eastern Standard Time.
Not an Eastern Standard Time, and if you're in Mountain Time, it's only 3 o'clock, and if you're in the UK, it's what is it? It's midnight. So we recognize that we broadcast at 6 o'clock live, but there are people who watch this at all different times. People leave comments anytime they want. But whether you watch it live or in the archives, we're really a community that's knitted together through the use of technology. Technology is our microphone. It's our platform, which allows us to give voice to our Jewish identity as modern people. It comes out of the philosophy that speaks to who we are as modern Jews. Jews who incorporate science and modernity, who aren't afraid to wrestle and grapple with great questions. We're going to talk theology tonight. We're going to talk about one of the great Jewish philosophers, though I think there are some who said he left Judaism. We're going to talk about that later. Grappling with Jewish identity and how we give voice to it is what makes our JewishCommunity.org and Congregation Beth Adam the places that they are. We bring this together to create a bold Judaism that speaks to our place in our world today. So we're delighted you're here. We're going to continue with the candle lighting, and then what I hope and I think and I know will be an interesting conversation. So we'll continue with this. On this Sabbath, we create our moment in time. We pause to reflect upon our yesterdays and tomorrows, to renew our ties with family and friends, to restore our energies, to refresh our spirits.
As the sun descends and the shadows lengthen, the distractions of the day give way to the stillness of the night. It is time now for us to see not with our eyes, but with our hearts and minds. As the day gives way to evening, it is time for us to welcome the Shabbat.
The candles stand before us waiting to be lit. We recall our ancestors as we too seek to dispel the darkness and banish the cold, to bring glowing softness and warmth and safety into our homes. May the dancing flames of these candles kindle warmth within our hearts, wisdom in our minds, passion in our spirits. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or ba'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. So we had a conversation with your husband last time we were doing service together, whether one does the Ashkenazic Sephardic approach, yes, of lighting the candles. So we had that. But tonight we're not going to talk about candle lighting. We're going to talk about Spinoza, one of my favorite Jewish philosophers.
You like him because he's a renegade.
He's a renegade and a heretic. And it's, if you watch my Yom Kippur evening sermons, I talked about how heresy in one age becomes normative in another.
But not always.
But I would say with Spinoza, not always, but a lot of the time. And the reason I picked Spinoza tonight and asked you to talk about Spinoza, it's his birthday on Tuesday, November 24th, 1632.
That's right.
The Netherlands. He was born in Amsterdam, lived in Amsterdam, buried in The Hague. And he is an important Jewish philosopher. And we thought we'd talk a little bit about different aspects of his philosophy and the fact that he ultimately, at age 23, was excommunicated from the Jewish community. And a lot of people didn't even know there was an excommunication.
That's right. It's a great honor. If you're excommunicated, then you know you must have said something big and scary.
I'm jealous.
That's right.
So what did he say? What was so challenging about Spinoza that the Jewish community excommunicated him, which involved a sort of a whole ritual of, actually I have some of the text of what they said when they kicked him out, and they there's a whole tradition of they extinguished candles as a soul was being extinguished from the Jewish community, and they walked over them as they exited the synagogue. Pretty powerful stuff, but it was in response to who he was and what he said. So what were we talked a little bit about biblical criticism, theology.
So I think there are really three main things that made him so problematic. One, he really believed that people should think for themselves.
Oh my goodness,
freedom of thought, and that's actually what God wants, is the kind of pure freedom of independent thought.
Right, reason.
So he was centuries before his time, really, if you think about it.
Right, and I think that's really the hard, as we talk about him, it really is hard to think back 300 plus years to the world that pre the Enlightenment, which he actually helped create, pre-science, pre so much of what we know. So when somebody says think and reason, it was radical.
And also to question the halakha, the religious Jewish thought and law, and to question whether or not every word of the Bible, the God-given word, was actually true, or even by a single author. And he began those radical ways of approaching Judaism, and the community and I think the world were not ready for him.
Right, and there are some people, it's very interesting, there are some people who thought that the Jewish world was afraid that he was going to foment anti-Semitism, so they wanted to get him away because they were afraid people would look at them as somehow associated with his idea, so that...
Right, he was dangerous for the Christian world, too.
Right, I was dangerous.
Exactly.
And that notion of, what we call biblical criticism today, which is the idea of analytic study of the Bible, he really was the beginning of, because he sort of followed the footsteps. There's some other people, but the very end of the Torah tells the story of Moses' death and burial. And I think the last line is of the Torah, isn't it? And there never arose another prophet like Moses again.
In Israel.
In Israel, which would be odd for the person who is supposed to have written the whole thing to write his own death, burial, and that he was the greatest one who'd ever lived. So Spinoza began to say, well, he couldn't have written that. Comes with that tradition that maybe Ezra wrote the Torah prophet, but even began to push that more and began to question the authenticity of the Bible, and that there may be things that were very human in it.
Right. The idea that there was a human hand in Revelation is something that, even while you can see sort of roots, I think, of this conversation in the Talmud. The idea that a person would actually question whether or not all of the Torah came from the mouth of God, or maybe had some human influence on it, or maybe even that parts of it don't actually work together in total harmony. Really, I think for a very powerful religious tradition of its time, actually does force one to look at tradition and also obligation very differently. So he no longer felt as obligated by it as the Word of God.
Right, right. And think about it just for a moment. If you think about today, fundamentalists of all kinds of ilks, think about, they believe that what they're saying is the Word of God. I mean, Spinoza challenged that. And if he was alive today, he would be a heretic in many communities to this very day.
That's right.
Right? Any fundamentalist who does that. So, and feeling one isn't obliged to be held to that, the halakha, the Jewish tradition, the standards. Amazing stuff. But he came to it both because his analytical, but also his approach to God. Theology, which is big stuff. So theologically, do you see different terms that people use to refer to him?
Right. Go ahead.
Well, some people say he's a pantheist, and some say he's a panentheist. We're not going to dissect him too much, but in large measure, pantheism believes God and nature are one and the same thing, that they are two words that represent the same identity.
The same force.
Same force.
But to actually believe that you're beyond all forces of nature is also a problematic way to understand the world, or to believe that you're a victim of nature and of God, and that you have no role in the world. So I think he really is the beginning of human beings wanting to say, maybe we can actually stand against nature and have our own thought.
Right, but there was that, and the idea that because God and nature are one and the same, there was nothing supernatural about the universe. No miracle could occur, which also was so anything in the Bible that was a miracle by definition never could have happened, because nothing that contradicts the laws of nature exists. And God is not a volitional God.
Right.
God is simply the laws of nature as they function, which is this incredibly radical stuff. For us, it isn't. I mean,
Right.
You know, as today.
But we're all his children.
Right. I like that. We're all his Spinozas. And to lay that kind of ground. It was interesting, too. There were people who called him God intoxicated.
Right.
Because he saw God everywhere. And there were people who called him an atheist because his notion of God wasn't the notion of God that people found was a typical notion. It was no longer the commanding God, the omniscient God, the omnipresent God.
But I think if you look at him from a postmodern perspective, it's hard to see in all that rationalism God, right? I think you and I would actually want to critique that.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, this also goes to the other piece of this, and I think this is really important, is that when people use the word God, there really are different definitions, and that there's a lot of presumptiveness when people use the language of theology, and it really is important to ask people what they mean by that construct and how they see it and what it means, because the implications are really different. If you see God and nature as one as the same thing, then this whole notion of I'm acting in God's will because he told us this doesn't hold up anymore. You can't function that way. People ultimately have to take responsibility for their actions. Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox anything sort of falls by the wayside.
Right. So if you have to take responsibility for your actions and you actually can make choices about how you understand God in the universe or how you understand text, that's going to create a completely different set of opportunities in terms of engaging the text.
Right.
So he's the beginning, I think, of bringing us each as individuals to analyze the text and to try to make it our own. That's how I see it.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean, to the extent to which I feel like I'm his child too, right? Without that concept that the individual mind, heart, soul, right? All of us actually need to dissect the text. Actually, is also what opens it up to us, and then we're not just listening to one truth, but actually maybe there are multiple truths there.
Right. Because before it was all about authority.
Right.
Because it was you basically had to do what the authority told you, what your rabbi had taught, or things like that.
And a single interpretation.
And it opened it up. And what's so fascinating is, so he does this. I mean, there's a tradition. It's not true. There's a legend that he actually sort of ground the lenses for Galileo, which is time sequence. It doesn't work, but it's a great.
It's nice.
It's nice because it's all about this period of time. Galileo was a little bit before him when people were sort of breaking open from authority, and I think. It's so fascinating that he came at it like a Galileo came at it from a scientific perspective. He was looking at evidence. He was turned his as a scientist. He turns a telescope to the sky to look at something and then analyze the data and came to it. Spinoza was much more of was a thinker. He came to it through.
But he was dissecting the text with
Oh, I like that. Was nice. That was
with a microscope.
That was very homiletical of you.
No, but I think it's true. He was looking at it with a multiple lenses of a microscope that were very scary. Galileo was very scary how he looked at the heavens.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I think these people were I think they were frightening because they were destabilizing forces, and when Spinoza started to do it and started asking these questions, even when people, it's interesting. I think. Even when you ask a question like this, people might want to reject it, but it puts a question in their mind.
Right.
And all of a sudden they have to think about that question and begin to feel it.
But to think as an individual is something that you and I take for granted.
Right. It's normative.
Right.
Because I believe he really is the father
of
the Enlightenment.
So what do you think was the force that caused him to be that renegade, right? Because I see him as a little bit crazy because he was so far ahead of his time, right? I mean, it's a century before even, small groups of people embraced those ideas, right? But something in him.
Right. I'm trying to think. You asked an interesting question. I'm trying to think that's a fascinating. What is the spark of genius, craziness,
and education? He also he was getting those influences.
Right.
He had outside influences on the way he thought.
Right.
And I think he also believed that he was hearing something from the text. I hear him saying, "Call out to me to say, look at me further." Maybe there are ethics and problems and God here in a way that's different than, a single interpretation. So
Okay,
I think there was something that called out to him.
It may have been.
Because he could have just walked away. I mean, lots of people found it absurd and irrational and oppressive. Could walk away to the edges of the community, but why go into it in order to explode it?
Right.
So
No, I think that's what's fascinating because he really didn't. He never really, and he lived a very. In some ways, religious life. He was a very kind, gentle. He lived a life living the values of what people often called religious values of kindness and charity and things like that. And even when he was kicked out of the Jewish community, he found a religious community in which to function, because at that time there was no really such thing as a secular community.
Right.
There was,
He couldn't join your synagogue.
he couldn't. Beth didn't exist back then, but we will have him now. If and I don't think there are any descendants of Spinoza.
Not that I know of.
Not that I'm aware of either. And it's interesting that he laid. That what is the spark, and were there multiple sparks going on? Was it was Galileo and Spinoza and Kepler and some of these other people in different parts? Was there in the Western world that were some ideas that were beginning to move around and they were encountering that got them thinking? Today we live in such a fast-paced world. An idea in one place can circle the globe 12 times before we finish the service. Right. But Spinoza, it was much harder and much longer to get to those places. But he did begin this questioning of the Enlightenment, which sort of breaks open the scientific revolution, brings on deism, which allows for America, our theology in America.
And the idea of progress, and that human beings can cause progress and not just God and nature.
Right. Oh, it's incredible. And then the Jewish Enlightenment, the Haskalah, which we're certainly heirs of as Reform rabbis. That brings on the Reform movement. It brings on Zionism and many modern Zionisms as we know it, and thinking.
So in a way, we are his children, right? If he's going to be a radical thinker and make way for new modern thinkers and new modern movements to emerge, then we certainly stand on his shoulders. I was sharing with you earlier that one of my teachers and mentors has this chapter. Eugene Borowitz has a chapter in his book on modern Jewish thought. At the end, he has this afterword of why Spinoza's not in this book, right? Because in a sense, what he's doing is a very sort of philosophical, rationalist attack on traditional Judaism.
Right.
But it's not really a Jewish thought.
Except now, so then I brought this. You see what I have on my desk?
I see what you have, right.
Tender by Sansino and Syme. This is another Jewish book in which it's called Finding God, 10 Jewish Responses. And this is published by the UHC or the URJ.
Right.
And they've added a couple more God concepts. But it's interesting because they include, so one Jewish theologian says he's outside of Judaism, and other Jewish theologians say he's within Judaism.
And then he opens it up.
Right. So that one, I have Spinoza and other heretics.
Yes, this is a good one too. If you're going to look at it, but if you want to read multiple pieces, then you have the Cambridge Companion to Spinoza, of course. And actually, Spinoza is becoming more and more popular among Israeli philosophers.
Really?
Isn't that fascinating?
There was a play, too. There was a play done in D.C. There's some modern stuff about Spinoza.
Yeah, several novels.
Right. Rebecca Goldstein wrote a novel. She's at Harvard.
Which you should read, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot going on because he's such a fascinating figure, pushed the envelope, changed the way we saw the world, excommunicated, buried in a church in The Hague, in The Hague, at the New Church. Because
have you made pilgrimage to his grave?
Twice. In fact,
how did we know that?
And in fact, I did if you go to, I lit a Hanukkah candle there.
Really?
Yeah, when I was doing a worldwide, I was traveling around the world lighting Hanukkah candles. We'll post that. I'll post it during Hanukkah. But what was interesting, because he was, once you were excommunicated, you wouldn't be allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. There was no such thing as non-Jewish. You were either Jewish or Christian.
Right.
And so he had to be buried in a Christian place. The understanding I had, he was actually buried inside the church, but whoever the patron was stopped paying at some point, or the family died off. So the bones were cast into the courtyard of the church.
So he was excommunicated twice.
Twice. And he's in the church. The only grave in the church, in the courtyard, is there. I then understood that Ben Gurion came to ask the rabbis of Amsterdam to rescind the excommunication, and they wouldn't do it because they said, "We didn't do it.
Who are we?"
So on his headstone is a small Hebrew stone, sort of attached to it, because it's in Latin, I think, is the headstone, and it says Amcha in modern Hebrew, which means one of the people.
Right, one of the people. So he was brought back in.
And so you say it's really interesting, and so
he was really made Jewish and Israeli by the law of return.
And Ben Gurion. So the Jewish tradition is, or one of the Jewish traditions, when you visit a cemetery or visit a grave, is you put a stone there. So every time I go to the church.
You make pilgrimage.
I make pilgrimage because I think it's just so important, because it really. We are his children. And what it also should remind, I think, all of us, is ideas have power.
Yeah.
They aren't sort of flat and without effervescence. Really strong ideas are transformative and can push people in new directions. And really powerful ideas are scary.
But you have to wonder, had he approached it differently or spoken about it differently? There's always the question about, when somebody is thinking differently or is leading thinking in a new direction, right? How fast, how hard, how much ahead, as it were, or in a different direction from the community can you be and expect people to join you? Right? He was a lonely renegade.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's. I mean, in some ways, it's sad because you said what happened. He eventually dies of tuberculosis, TB. I think there's a whole thing about he ground
And he was
lenses.
so young.
Right. He died very young. I can't remember. And you sit there and go, wow, what was that like? He found a community. He goes from Baruch Spinoza to Benedict Spinoza. He joins this community of Christians and talks with them. And really upends what we do today. It raises so many questions.
And he has multiple identities. I think actually people today can identify with him more now in our time than perhaps in the generations that preceded us, right? Because I think more, and I don't even know, maybe there are people with us this evening who have lived those multiple identities and have multiple names, right? In different contexts or in different times in your life. Right, and that he was and is to us today Baruch, and he also, is Benedict, and became an important philosopher, certainly in the non-Jewish world, and becomes the foundation for ethical philosophy.
Right. He wrote
the philosophy of ethics.
Sure, and really, he only came back into the Jewish world as a function of being accepted by the non-Jewish world. If because of the secular Enlightenment, the Jewish Enlightenment, and he gets brought back in intellectually because of that. Which is fascinating. And he really, to my remembering, when I took philosophy in college, he's the only Jewish philosopher that studied in a non-Jewish philosophy class as a major seminal thinker.
Well, certainly at that. That's a good question.
I mean, I don't remember. I mean, there were other, and it wasn't because he was Jewish.
I don't know if that's true anymore.
I don't know, but it wasn't because he was Jewish. He simply was such an important. If you're studying Descartes, you're studying Hume, you're studying Kant.
And he had such an influence on all of these people.
Right. You study Spinoza.
Right.
But Maimonides, who within Judaism we oftentimes talk about, he's never brought up in a non-Jewish philosophy class.
Right. I actually know there's this wonderful thing where actually Hegel speaks about how important he was for him, and basically says there is no world in a way without there's no philosophy, right, without following Spinoza. There actually is no modern philosophy.
Really?
Yeah, and that's how important Hegel thought he was.
Wow.
So, I don't know if you can get to a higher level than that in terms of philosophy.
I don't think so. Well, this is great. So what I would encourage everyone is to, take a little time. There's, whether it's a Wikipedia article, you can get a quick summary of Spinoza. There's some good things out there. If you're certainly if you get the chance to go to the Netherlands, go visit his grave in The Hague. You can also visit his house, which I've never done. A friend of mine just told me about going to his house, which I am going to do the next time I'm outside of Amsterdam. Absolutely do that.
And embrace the renegade philosophers of today. It's interesting to think about who they might be.
Right, the ones who are really pushing the envelopes. Yep. Oftentimes, the people who are most beaten up are the people who are going to be remembered the longest.
That's right.
Which is very interesting. Well, this is good. I want to do this. We should. Is there a class? Do you teach a class on Spinoza?
Well, I have, but not at the moment.
Okay. Well, good. Well, let's continue with our challah reading.
Sure. As the fingers of the challah intertwine, so do we join hands in our common humanity, sharing the fruits of our labors. We cherish that which has been created through human effort. For it is through the work of our hands, the strength of the human spirit, the vision of our minds, that our dreams are woven into the tapestry of time. We celebrate the accomplishments of yesterday and today, anticipating the possibilities of tomorrow. May the sharing of this challah strengthen our bonds with others who walk upon this earth. Blessed is the work of our hands, Baruch Amal Kapenu, Baruch Hazon Ha'adam. Blessed is the vision of our minds. Blessed is the bread of the earth, Baruch Lechem Ha'aretz.
And then if you have some juice or some wine, feel free to join me as well. Oops, I lost my page. We celebrate the fruit of the vine and the bounty of nature as we lift the cup and sip from it. For we're part of nature. That's from Spinoza, right? Where we are. We're part of nature which gave us birth and continues to sustain us. Even as we depend upon nature, so do we influence its course. to search for understanding. We've gained the knowledge to shape our world. Guided by the best of human wisdom and the compassion of our spirit, we accept the responsibility which rests upon us. May the taste of the wine upon our lips stir within us a reverence for nature and a respect for human endeavor. Ruchim hachayim ba'olam, blessed is the life within the world. Ruchim hachayim ba'adam, blessed is the life within each person. And so we say, l'chaim,
L'chaim,
to life.
to life.
So, a couple quick announcements. Next week is the Friday after Thanksgiving, if you live in the United States. So I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And if you're traveling somewhere, safe travels.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people, it's one of the busiest travel days of the year, right, or weekends of the year. We sort of scurry around. This also is a function, I think, of what it means to be a modern American, probably a modern person. We are spread across the land, and trying to get together as family is always a bit of a challenge. So if you're driving, drive carefully. Hopefully where you're driving, there's not going to be a lot of snow. Or there will be, and take your warm woolies.
That's right.
So we're all going to do that. I'm going to take mine too. So next week for Friday night services, Pillsbury, our rabbinic intern, and I will be leading services. We're going to be talking about our new Hanukkah resource guide that's going to be online sometime in the middle of next week. You should go look at it, because Cincinnati OJC, take a look at the resource guide, download the resource guide, share the resource guide. And there is a new Hanukkah video. It is going to be fun, and it's exciting. And the biggest thing is, just like a good book, you need to get to the very end for the surprise secret that's inside. So that'll be next week. Go to Cincinnati OJC, or you can find it on our Facebook page. We'll post it. Again, share it, like it, and so we can celebrate the upcoming holiday of Hanukkah with joy and with mirth. As always, stay in touch. You can write me at rabbi@ourjewishcommunity.org. You can leave a note on our Facebook page. You can leave comments in the chat after the service closes tonight. Those comments continue, and people can talk back and forth over time and over distance. Sort of like books like Spinoza.
That's right.
Time and distance don't mean anything anymore. So that's great. And we close with our final words. May we know blessings those who are near, and may we know blessings those who are far. And may the Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.